and welcome back to Mark on Motoring, where today I'm filming a car review, but the car I've got for review today is something very special. Today I've actually got access to a 7th generation Chevrolet Corvette. Now, the Corvette has never really found huge appeal in the UK, yet in its native market, even though it's a halo car from a volume car manufacturer, these cars do sell very well. In fact, the C7s have only dipped under 30,000 units per annum in 1 year of production, and that was only because the factory was actually on shutdown for a substantial part of that model year. The thing is, here in the UK we've always had a certain perception of American cars being very good in a straight line, but not necessarily being very well suited to corners, which we do seem to have a lot more of here in Europe. Also, our roads are generally narrower than what they are in America, and the Corvette has just never seemed the natural choice. Plus, we've also got a great selection of sports cars from around Europe at our disposal. That said though, the Corvette has always represented great value for money. In recent years the Corvette has actually been sold in the UK, albeit as a left-hand drive only model. But what we really need to know about the Corvette is it just a muscle car in a sharp suit? Or is it a true sports car? Stick around and we'll find out. Let's play ball. Welcome to Sherburn Aero Club. Feature of today's video is the 7th generation Chevrolet Corvette. This is the Corvette Stingray, the base model, and it's a return to the Stingray name that we first saw back in the 1960s version, the C2 generation. The C3 model that followed did briefly have some models that were also badged Stingray, but other than that we've not seen the Stingray name for quite a number of years. Follows the format of most Corvettes, with its engine being sort of up front, but there are a few differences to the previous gen models. So the styling is far more angular than on the C5 or C6 generation of cars. We've got some interesting aerodynamic features on this car. I do hate fake grills, but all the grills on this car do serve a purpose. Front grille on this Stingray model, as in most cars, feeds that front radiator. If you had the Z06 or ZR1, there would also be an extra duct in here feeding the front brakes. Up on the bonnet here, which is actually made of carbon fibre on this vehicle, we've got another vent. Now I can actually feel heat rising out of there. That is actually expelling hot air from the radiator. As we walk back along the car, again, more vents behind here. These ones taking the hot air away from the wheel arch and the brakes and any air pressure that's built up under there. Again, if you have the Z06 or the ZR1, you would have some additional venting on here. On the Stingray models though, you do still get some vents for the braking, they're just hidden underneath the floor. At the back of the vehicle we've got some more vents expelling air from the car, and it's quite an imposing sight. We've got this quad exhaust system, which on the UK models that all come with the Z51 performance package, that is an active exhaust. Quad tail lights as well. On most Corvettes in the past they've always been more rounded, with a few exceptions. On this model they're actually far more angular. Some people have actually criticised as it does look a lot more like Chevrolet's Camaro model, but no, they do actually suit the style of the car. Now you may have noted on this vehicle we don't actually have any visible door handles, just a little cutout and an electronic button to open the doors. So what happens if your battery were to fail? Well, quite simple. This keyless entry key here, on the back of it we've actually got a key hidden inside. Underneath this rear bumper there's actually a hole. You can actually pop that key in there and there is an emergency trunk release. Once you're inside the trunk there's actually a little pull toggle and that'll pop the doors open for you. Incidentally, well, on the subject of the trunk space, 171 litres with the roof down in the convertible, 243 with the roof up, and if you go for the coupe version with the Targa roof, you're looking at about another 40 litres or so of space. This car also has a capless fuel filler, just push that to release and then pump straight in. There's no additional fuel cap in there. While we're on the outside of the vehicle as well, we've got to mention these wheels. These particular ones are in the standard finish, but you can get the same wheel design in about 4 different colours. So you can have them black if you want, or you can have them machine finish, or if you want to go the full hog and be really American, you can even have them in a chrome finish. So these are all wrapped up in Michelin Pilot Super Sport ZPs, 245/35 ZR19s up front, 285/30 ZR20s at the rear. Lift away the carbon fibre bonnet on the Corvette and you do reveal the heart of the beast. So we've got a Chevy small block V8 in here. This particular application, it's the LT1. So the LT1 displaces 6.2 litres in capacity. Quite a traditional engine in some senses. We've got push rods, we've got a cam in block, and we've only got 2 valves per cylinder in here. Variable valve timing though does allow this engine to sing beyond 6,000 RPM, where it will produce 460 horsepower with this Z51 performance package, which was standard on all the UK model Corvettes. We've got over 600 Newton meters of torque in there as well, so quite an impressive engine. We've also got cylinder deactivation on here, which is part of the active fuel management. So the car will actually shut down 4 of its cylinders and just run on the other 4. Supposedly this car will actually return around 30 miles per gallon, which is pretty impressive for a car of such a large displacement. There were of course other versions of the engine available. There was the LT4 in the Z06, which produced over 600 horsepower, 750 odd horsepower if you went for the full fat ZR1. That was actually a 214 mile per hour car, so a serious piece of kit. So we're aboard Chevy's flagship model, and as you would expect for any flagship, we've got quite a luxurious interior, even by European standards. Obviously American car interiors were often criticised for not being quite as high quality as their European counterparts, but I think Chevy have definitely upped the game a little bit in here. I mean, there's a few bits like this cup holder that's probably not the highest quality, but it's certainly not bad by any stretch. There's certainly plenty of leather splashed about the place as well. So this particular one is LT2 trim. If you've got the LT3 trim, you actually got an upgrade to Napa leather, and you got a bit more colour on parts of the dashboard, like over this cowl in here, and a few bits on the near side, and this door trim as well. So this particular one is trimmed out in Kalahari leather, which I think is actually probably one of the nicest colours. It really does complement the black rose exterior paint on this car. Of course, there were other colours. You could have the interior all black, or you could have black with grey, or you could have adrenaline red, which is actually a really nice colour, and I know that has been carried over into the C8 version of the Corvette as well. Well, we're in here, you will, eagle-eyed amongst you may have spotted, I've got a manual gearbox. Quite unique actually. In this car it has got a 7-speed manual gearbox. We do still have some paddles here on the steering wheel, which are sort of carried over from the automatic, but in this particular car these are actually selectable for automatic rev matching. Though I'm not entirely sure why you'd want to do that. Surely that does take away some of the fun of owning a car with a manual gearbox. Now, the earlier versions of the car were available with a 6-speed automatic gearbox. That was only the first year of production for the 2014 models. That was the L680 gearbox, which was carried over from the previous generation of Corvette, the C6. All of the automatic C7s though, you actually got the L890 transmission, which is an 8-speed automatic gearbox. Now this particular example, even though it's a few years old, has done very little mileage. It's done less than 2,000 miles from new. Some owners in some parts of the world, probably the hotter states, have actually reported some issues with these dash tops and around this vent here, with the leather actually delaminating and lifting, but certainly no evidence of anything like that on this particular car. Being a 2017 car, as you would expect, there is a lot of technology crammed into this car. Of course, the steering wheel has got buttons for most of these functions, so you've got your cruise control on one side and various controls for your infotainment on the other, and again some more pull buttons for the volume and things like that sort of down at the bottom of this wheel. This one's got the flat bottom steering wheel as well. I think the very earliest versions of this car had a similar design but with a more rounded off steering wheel. As you would expect, again, we've got everything else. You've got climate control in here, which is dual zone, so we've got additional controls over there for the passenger, or you can just sync it and operate it as one system. We've also got heated seats, and we've also got cooled seats in here as well, which is a really nice touch. But one thing I do want to draw to your attention is this screen here. Now, I've often said I'm not a huge fan of touch screens in cars. Yes, it does add a lot of functionality, but you lose that dexterity and you've got to sort of fumble around in menus finding things. Now, luckily this car does have some physical buttons for a lot of controls, such as the heating and some of the radio and media functions. It's quite a clever system actually with this touchscreen. So if you just pop that the ignition on there, we've got a button here, and if I press this button, the screen actually drops down to reveal a storage cubby with a USB. Now, there's actually a special mode on this car. I'll just pop that screen back up there. So let's say someone else is going to be driving the car, particularly if you arrive somewhere that has valet parking. Not an issue I ever have personally, but I'm sure some people do. So you can put the car into what's called valet mode, so you can store items securely behind that screen or in the glove box, and you basically set the valet mode, you enter a personalised code in the screen and it locks out a lot of the infotainment functions, and it also locks that storage cubby and the glove box. It doesn't actually lock out this armrest here, but it does lock out the other compartments. Now, there is actually an SD card stored in here as well, and that does record information from the performance data recorder, which is an optional extra which is actually equipped on this vehicle. Now, the PDR does many things, but while we're on the subject of valet mode, you can actually have that set so when the car's in valet mode it records. So if you hand your car over to a valet or someone else to drive, and they decide to sneak off and do some donuts in the car park, for example, well, this will record all the evidence of what they've been up to with your pride and joy. As I say, the car has this PDR recorder, and you can actually set backdrops on there to show different information, so you can have everything from lap times to telemetrics about your G-forces and steering angles. You can show RPMs and all manner of other information on there. It's quite a clever system. Instrument cluster behind here, again, you've got various information displayed depending on the mode. So most modes just have this circular, more traditional looking rev counter with a speedometer, but if you want, you can have everything from navigation, you can have sort of a more strip style rev counter, all dependent on the mode selected, with this little toggle down here where you can cycle through the different vehicle modes. So Chevrolet's little sports car has an interior inspired by jet fighters, so everything sort of wraps around like this sort of wrap-around jet fighter style cockpit. There are a few other interesting features though, one being the HUD or heads-up display. Now, I think I'm actually going to have to start the engine in order for this one to work. So the car is, well, it automatically starts in eco mode. I'll just change that to tour. See, that exhaust has just got a little bit more bellowy as well. So yeah, the car has a head-up display operated by buttons down the near side of the steering wheel here. Let me just see if we can get that one to show. Ah yeah, so I can just see that actually projected on the display there, and I've actually on the windscreen, and I've got buttons here I can actually raise or lower, so I can have it sort of higher up, or I can drop it right down low. So it actually sort of appears just between the crest of the centre of the bonnet and those and the fender. So it's really neat touches. That's something I find quite interesting. Again, depending on what mode you're in, I believe that should actually change. Ah, yeah, so depending what by operating this info button next to the one for the height, you can actually change what this displays. So there I've got a nice long sort of strip rev counter with a speedometer. Press it again, I've just got the revs. Press it again, I've got the round speed rev counter. Again, speedometer. So yeah, lots of useful information on there. You can't toggle back, you've got to sort of cycle through it all in the same direction, but I think that's a pretty cool touch. Can't go any further without mentioning Helen Emsley, Executive Director of Design at General Motors. She's responsible for this interior and many other GM cars. The remarkable thing is that not so much that it's a woman, but that she's actually British. Yep, Helen Emsley, born and raised in the UK, joined General Motors Europe in 1989 and has graduated to doing an interior on an American Icon. Really can't say much more than that. I bet they don't put that in the marketing. So we've been quite lucky today that we've had this opportunity to bring this car out on the airfield, and we've actually been granted access to one of the runways that's not in use today. Now sadly the weather is a little bit on the wet side, which is always fun when you've got 460 horsepower going through the rear wheels. So the car obviously starts in eco, we'll just set that to track. The remaining tarmac airstrip at this airfield is around 800 metres, so perhaps not the longest of runways, so yeah, we know this car certainly goes. Let's just hope that she stops as well. It's hard getting all that power down when this runway's wet. Second gear, feeding the power. It's 19 third, fourth gear, 115 and on the brakes. One final run, so steady away into second, just feeling the traction, squeezing the power in, into third, but if you're brave enough, I think it probably would do a bit more, but we don't want to be running out of runway. Before we get too much further into this video, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Sherburn Aero Club, who have been very accommodating with us today, allowing us to film on the airfield. Sherburn Aero Club is a great place. I've visited there many times, sometimes for classic car shows, but there's a lot more that goes on. Obviously you can go and take pleasure flights, or perhaps you won't mind having a go at learning to fly yourselves. Failing that, maybe you just want somewhere to go and hang out and meet friends. Well, they've got a fantastic cafe on site as well. They've got picnic tables outside, so on a nice day you can sit outside and see aircraft arriving and leaving as well. So yeah, fantastic place to visit. Right, on with the review. So the Corvette's lineage goes all the way back to 1953 with the C1 Corvette. Safe to say the Corvette has become something of a national American icon, as recognisable as the Statue of Liberty and Babe Ruth. In fact, over the last several decades there's actually only been 1 year where there weren't a Corvette in production, back in 1983. But that's actually a tale for another video. Obviously there's far too much history over those several decades to cram into one video. But one thing I have learnt during my research about the Corvette is that there are some things you just do not mess with the formula. Now the latest generation of Corvette, the C8, actually does have a mid-engine. This one, the C7, technically is a front-mounted mid-engine because the engine is set back behind the front wheel axle line. And of course your Corvette has got to have a Chevy small block V8, and it's got to have 4.4 inch bore spacings. Back in the 1980s with the C4 generation of Corvette, the car was starting to struggle a little bit with emissions regulations, and it was competing against a lot of Japanese imports with smaller engines that were turbocharged. Now Chevrolet did actually toy with the idea of a V6 turbo. Now Corvette enthusiasts would have probably sharpened up their pitchforks at such a thought. The Corvette has got to have that small block V8. So they went and enlisted the help of Lotus when developing the ZR1 model. Now, the ZR1 had a few differences, had a wider rear track for example, Lotus tuned suspension, and there were changes to the engine. Lotus actually did develop a head for the small block, but found that it wouldn't actually fit in the car. So they ended up developing a new engine, and the Corvette has always had a pushrod engine, never had overhead cams. The Lotus engine actually had quad cams and 32 valves, so a much more advanced engine. The problem is the bore spacings weren't that 4.4 inch. So they had to redesign it, and it actually cost them about 25 horsepower in the end. But as I say, that is how strict they are with the heritage. As I say, you cannot mess with it. Messing with the Corvette is a bit like messing with Coca-Cola. When Coca-Cola tried to change the recipe in the 1980s, they ended up going back to the original because people hated the new one so much. Now I'm currently pootling around in tour mode. The exhaust is set for tour, which is a little bit raughty, but not to the same extent as when you're in sport or track mode. There is actually another mode where you can sort of silence the exhaust down to a whisper. Well, you will barely notice it, in all fairness. UK cars obviously have that Z51 performance pack, and we've got that active exhaust, and we've got the mag dampers as well. So the magnetic dampers, when the car's in tour as it is now, the car actually rides really well. If you get on a really poor road surface, it might get a little bit unsettled and jiggly, but for the most part, very composed, very relaxing car to drive. Likewise at low speed, steering feels weighted just nice, steering wheel is nice and compact, and yeah, it's really good. The car's actually a little bit difficult to place, at times being a left-hand drive, and obviously you've got quite a long bonnet as well, which can make getting out of some junctions a little bit trickier than it might be. Also with the hood up, I've got a huge blind spot over this shoulder as well, which I have found a problem pulling out of a few junctions earlier on. Gear shift is really nice on this car as well. As I say, it's a 7-speed manual. There is a little bit of extra resistance as you come across for that 7th gear as well. But let's just stick it into sport now. I'm actually going to drop only to 3rd gear, 30 mile an hour. And that's already 60 mile an hour. Straight up into 6th gear, we're pootling along here about 1400 revs. car does cruise really, really well. Obviously in sport mode we've got a bit more vocal with active exhaust as well. Bear in mind this car is a left-hand drive, so you've got to be quite careful with opposing traffic, especially on narrow twisty roads like this. Obviously not a problem when you rolled off the production line in Bowling Green, Kentucky, but when you're at your KFC drive-thru in the UK, well, it's going to be a hell of a stretch all the way over to that near side window to take your delivery. Thankfully toll booths in the UK seem to be becoming a less common occurrence. It's more sort of online and electronic tags and things now, but yeah, if you do fancy a Corvette, they were all left-hand drive, so do bear that in mind. Looking over this bonnet though, the view out is fantastic. Visibility is actually surprisingly good. They've done quite a good job of keeping that bonnet line down, and between the sort of wing and the centre hump, you've got this sort of scalped out cutaway, and that's where I've sort of got the heads-up display sat as well. So I've not even been looking at the display on the dashboard. I've been using the hood most of the time. So this car has a fully independent suspension setup front and rear, same setup at the front and back. So we've got double wishbone suspension with long and short arms, and cast aluminium control arms, and as I say, we've got those mag dampers as well. What we do have that's a little bit unique on this car though is we've actually got a carbon fibre leaf spring front and rear, but it's actually set not in the conventional manner. It's a transverse leaf spring, which I find really, really interesting. It's something I've not encountered on another vehicle, and it certainly seems to work quite well. Now we're just going to join the dual carriageway here. I'm actually going to stick it back in tow mode, because as I said, this car pulls perfectly well. So third gear just into this bend here, dropping just over 1000 RPM. Again, left-hand drive, so got to be careful with that near side mirror, just looking for a clear gap. And there, up to speed. Going to 7th gear, 1300 RPM at 70 mile an hour. I mean, this is why this car sips fuel the way it does. It's an aerodynamic car, it's got a low drag coefficient, and as I say, the engine's barely ticking over, it's hardly working at all. There's no wonder it's able to return around 30 mile per gallon. I mean, all that performance and fuel economy you can live with. I mean, what more could we want in a car? So, price-wise, when this car was new in 2017, you were looking at around £65,000–66,000, depending on options and things, and then obviously upwards from there. If you wanted a Corvette Stingray today, well, I have had a look, and I have actually seen a few for sale. Cheapest one I've found, well, I found two that were around 44,000. Similar age to this car. One of them actually was only about 20 mile away from here, and that was a manual as well. The majority of cars I have seen for sale though have been automatics, which do seem to be a little bit more, but again, you know, sort of 45 to 55,000 pounds seems to be about a ballpark for these cars at the minute. There is like the Z06 and the ZR1s, which have got the supercharged engines. I did actually see a car with a supercharged engine. I can't remember whether it was a Z06 or a ZR1. It's probably a Z06. I think they were asking in the region of about 90,000 for one of those. So yeah, quite a lot of money. But performance-wise, I mean, if you were to buy a Ferrari, I mean, you know, what's it going to cost you to get into a Ferrari California, for example, these days? And that's probably the nearest thing, and one of the cheaper models. Really, the Corvette is an absolute bargain in reality. These roads are a bit tight down here. Probably not the natural stomping ground for an American car, especially one that can crack 174 miles per hour. Incidentally, 0 to 60 on this car, by the way, is around 4 seconds, so pretty quick. But what's really surprised me with this car is that I did wonder if it were going to be a bit of a muscle car in drag. You know, just a big engine with a posh rock, but absolutely not. Would I call it an all-out proper sports car? Yeah, I mean, in sport mode, it certainly fulfills a lot of those credentials. It certainly goes quick, and the steering is great. Steering's really, really direct on this car. It has surprised me. We think of American cars as only being for straight lines, but Corvette definitely bucks that trend. But it's also a very competent GT. All right, convertible hasn't got quite as much load capacity as the coupe model will have. Obviously the coupe, you do lose some of that if you decide to take off the Targa roof and stow that in the boot. The seats in this car are excellent, very supportive, and even though they're quite narrow, they're still more than comfortable enough. I think you could quite easily take this car on an extended road trip with around 30 miles per gallon most of the time. And Arthur, who's loaned me this car, says even running all 8 cylinders, it doesn't seem to make a great deal of difference when you're in tow mode. The economy is still pretty good. That's been the real surprise of this car, how competent it is as an all-rounder. It just seems to do most things really, really well. Provided you can live with that left-hand drive only, I don't think you're going to have an issue. And as I say, when you do want to have some fun, it's more than obliging. This rev matching is actually quite good as well. To say I weren't keen on the idea initially. I mean, it just goes. Anyway, down to business before we have too much more fun. I have to say a huge thank you to Arthur for providing this vehicle today. It's certainly not every day you get the opportunity to review a Corvette on the channel. I really appreciate the fact that Arthur brought this car out, considering that the weather forecast for today weren't so great. In fact, the car arrived this morning absolutely spotless, and well, the same can't be said for it now. The weather certainly hasn't been too favourable today. I just want to have a quick talk about channel memberships, which I'm looking to launch. You may well actually be watching this video early as a paid up channel member, so I'll try and release some car reviews a little bit earlier to channel members, and also maybe some additional content from time to time. Car shows, it's a bit difficult for me to release stuff early, but we'll see how we get on with that. So by all means, if you haven't already become a channel member, do consider it. Also, again, if you've enjoyed the video, do give us a thumbs up, because it helps YouTube know that you're enjoying these videos. If there's anything you feel I may have missed, I'm by no means an expert on Corvettes. Certainly if we've got any viewers in the US, pop me something in the comments, it'd be great to hear.